السلام عليكم جميعا.
وعليكم السلام.
Hello, assalamu alaikum.
وعليكم السلام دكتورة أمل، ازيك؟
ازيك؟ Hello, Dr. Fadwa. Hello, Dr. Muhammad Zaman. Hello, Dr. Franco. Anyone else?
Hello, everyone.
Salam alaikum.
Yeah, welcome. Long time ago, I didn't see you. It's better to see you even on Zoom, right?
It's great to see you as well.
That's great. Hello, Greg. Nice to see you all friends even on Zoom.
Yeah,
It's true.
of course.
Yeah, better than nothing. How is everything in Jordan, in Argentina, in US?
Everything
Have
is
you
fine.
vaccinated? Have you
Not
been
yet.
vaccinated?
Yeah, I've had my
Okay.
first dose, but not the second. So
We're still
it's-
waiting.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we are still waiting. We registered.
still
only.
waiting
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
But the
We're still
cases
in the
is
middle of
very
a-
high today in Jordan, around 7,000 and half new cases.
Wow.
7,000, huh?
Yeah.
We
Wow.
stopped counting here.
Mm.
We stopped counting.
well, I hope it stays that way. We have 40,000 new cases in US today.
Which
So
is better than 200,000 a month ago. So
That's true. We're improving.
Mm.
But here we have lots of cases, but the government, you understand, will not count again.
Oh,
They
no.
stop
That's-
counting. Really, they stop counting, not to be asked to have vaccination or something like that. They stop counting.
It's a crazy situation. Here in
Even we
Argentina,
work normally. We open everything as normal case.
Really? Wow, we haven't
Really?
had normality for close to a year.
so no,
Yes,
no
we return
lockdown
to
there.
normality. Schools, universities, everything.
Wow.
We still have some courses online, but we return to normality.
That's amazing. Well, when do you think we should get started? I think I'm the chair. of
In
this
5
session.
minutes, because
5
we
minutes.
had
Okay, got it.
one other session, two
Mhm.
more sessions
Okay,
before this, and they finished now.
sounds good.
Only 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We had Diaridi and lots of GYM members in the opening in the morning.
Oh, that's great. The European GYA members.
Yeah. Do you remember Mary Wagon? She's from
Yes.
Hawaii, I think, or so on.
Mhm.
The time difference about 12 hours.
Oh, wow.
I think you can start because you have the first two speakers. Only Nafisa is missing.
Nafisa
Nafisa is from Canada.
I'm here. I'm here. Can
She's
you
here.
hear
Yeah,
me?
okay.
as
Nafisa
well.
is here. Hi.
Yeah.
And
So
Afisa.
that's okay.
Hi, everyone.
Let's go. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Okay, I'll get us
Hi,
started
Nafisa.
then.
How are you? How is Canada today?
Thank you. We haven't just like the US and Europe, we haven't been normal too for the past year, but hopeful now that the vaccination has started, that things will improve.
Yeah, you had another session for women in science today, yeah?
Yeah, this morning, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Let's go. I will
Okay.
leave you in your nice session, and I will meet you again after session. Thanks a lot.
Thank you,
Thank
Amal.
you.
And thanks so
Thank
much
you.
for inviting
Bye-bye.
us and convening
Bye-bye.
this. All right. Nafisa, maybe I'll get us started and then I'll turn things over to you. Okay, so I'll take about half and then you'll take half. We're co-chairing today. Does that sound good?
Yes, sounds
All
good.
right.
Yes.
Great.
So are you introducing the speakers? Because I had asked Amal and I wasn't sure what our role was.
Yeah. Use the book, the abstract book, to introduce the speakers, and you are on Facebook now.
Okay,
Take
very
care.
sounds
You
good.
are on
Thank
Facebook.
you.
Take care.
Okay, so Nafisa, I'll introduce everyone through you, and then you can introduce the last two speakers. Is that okay? I'll introduce the first three and you take the last two, or do you want to take actually, why don't you introduce me if you don't mind? Or I can introduce myself. It's totally up to you.
No, I will introduce you. Yes.
Sounds good. Thank you.
I just will look again for the book. Okay, shall I get started?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Welcome for attending. We're so honored to have you all here today, and it's a great pleasure to be here participating in this forum. Our very first speaker today is Dr. Gregory Weiss, a tenured professor of chemical biology in the Department of Chemistry, Molecular Biology, and Biochemistry and Pharmaceutical Sciences at UC Irvine. He earned his Bachelor's of Science degree from UC Berkeley and his PhD from Harvard University. He was awarded an NIH postdoctoral fellowship and he pursued postdoctoral studies with Dr. Jim Wells in Genentech. In 2000, he joined the faculty of UCI. His laboratory focuses on the interface between chemistry and biology, including studies of enzymes, molecular recognition, and bioelectronics. He has been named Outstanding Professor in Physical Sciences at UCI, Beckman Foundation Young Investigator, AAAS Fellow, and won an IG Nobel Prize, co-founder of 2 biotech companies. He was also named UCI's Entrepreneurial Leader of the Year in 2018 and a Faculty Innovation Fellow in 2019. Dr. Weiss, it's truly an honor to have you here and to speak to us about your work. When you are ready, you can start sharing.
Thank you so much, Professor Ishmael. It's a true honor to be here as well. I am thrilled. I just wish I was there in person with all of you. I would have really enjoyed visiting you. But this is really tremendous to see everyone today from across the world. And so this is a real thrill for me. So thank you again. And thanks a lot for that nice introduction. Okay, so I get to talk to you a little bit about my lab's research today. And of course, today is International Day of Women. And I want to get started just with the acknowledgements first, because my team has been since we started has always been majority women. And today's project is, let me just see if I can get this slideshow. Okay, and today's project is emblematic of that because this project was led by 3 women. And I want to just start by acknowledging their incredible leadership and hard work. In the US, starting about a year ago, we were all sent home to work from home. And a small number of my teammates, my lab members, went into work on SARS-CoV-2 projects related to COVID-19. And Kristen Gabriel, Sanjana Sen, and Emily Sanders emerged as leaders on that project. And I'm going to tell you about our initial results from that project today. Okay, before I get too far along, I just want to say, if I start to speak too quickly or something like that, raise your hand and I'll try to find it. Okay, and Professor Ishmael, maybe you can just cut in at any point, okay, to tell me that I'm talking too fast. I have a tendency to get excited. And if I start talking too fast, then people might not understand. Okay, so I have to start with some conflicts of interest. As you heard, I've started one company called Debut, another one called Phage Tech. And my research laboratory is also funded in part by Allergan and Illumina. But the stuff I'm going to be telling you about today is not at all related to Phage Tech. Phage Tech is a diagnostics company, but I deliberately did not patent nor license the technology I'll be talking about today. The goal here is just to have it adopted and get it out so it can do something about COVID-19. So the conflict of interest I'm obligated to tell you about because, well, I work at a university and we care a lot about conflicts. And so, for example, the data I'll be showing you has been reviewed by other faculty before I'm showing it to you, just to make sure, for example, I'm not overhyping it. Okay, so that's the conflict of interest disclosure. Here's the big picture. This is what I thought about a year ago. About a year ago, I had this crazy idea that we would go out and start to identify the bad antibodies associated with COVID-19. My theory was there are some patients who are experiencing a really severe response to the virus, SARS-CoV-2 that causes COVID-19. And I imagine that these antibodies would be non-neutralizing. And in being non-neutralizing, they would actually make the virus worse, the disease worse, by amping up and accelerating the immune response, leading to that immune hyperactivity that we associate with a severe outcome. And I'll just tell you a quick outline. We found this, we found an antibody, and then we found that people who have this antibody have much, much worse severity. And we also found that the patients who had this antibody generally had much worse comorbidities, which is a fancy way of saying they had a lot of other diseases that they were dealing with at the same time. And then I'll tell you a little bit about the future and where this is going. Okay, so this is the executive summary. So if you don't hear anything else that I say, this is what you need to know. We found a 22 amino acid peptide from this virus that correlates with more time in the hospital, more time in the ICU, more time in intubation, which is a tube, breathing tube being used to assist breathing, and then also death. And we define these 3 things, ICU stay, intubation, and death, as being severe disease. We found a disease risk factor score that can predict with 97% specificity that someone's going to come down with really severe disease. It's only, though, if they have both the antibody and the disease risk factor score, then they have a 13-fold likelihood of severe disease. And I'll show you in a moment, that only applies to about 25 to 28% of patients. So for those 25% of patients who have these antibodies, they're in trouble. And it's helpful to us because then we could start to provide stronger support and more care for those patients. Okay, so here's why this interested me. As a graduate student, I worked in structural immunology. And so I knew about this concept of original antigenic sin. This is a concept where an earlier infection biases the person's immune response. So here's an earlier infection. They have some virus. They have lots of antibodies to this virus 1. But then when they encounter virus 2 is just similar enough to the earlier infection that they get non-neutralizing antibodies that end up causing something called antibody-dependent enhancement. Okay. Additionally, there's other roles as well for this antigenic original sin, where it boosts the immune system. So in this case, I'm showing you it's actually assisting the virus getting inside the immune system cells, and that would be bad. But in addition, it could be presenting antigens to the immune system and driving infection that way. Okay, so here's what that would look like. So here's the non-neutralizing antibody assisting the virus in getting into these antigen-presenting cells. In another case, though, here it is actually not neutralizing the virus and then bringing that up and activating the immune system, but not allowing neutralization. So this virus is completely capable of going off and doing bad things, but it's at the same time stimulating the immune response, driving the cytokine storm. And you may know that this cytokine storm is a huge release of different signaling molecules that causes the immune system to go hyperactive and start eventually leading to death and organ failure, then death. Okay, so this was motivated in part by some really, I would use the word incandescent, meaning just brilliant papers that are out there. And one that says, at present, there is no known clinical findings, immunological assays, or biomarkers that can differentiate severe infection from immuno-enhanced disease. And we wanted to go after that. This to me was the motivation. We wanted to identify such things by specifically measuring antibodies. Okay, so that was our goal. And so what we did is we looked at the different proteins in SARS-CoV-2 and simply made a big list of them and broke them down into smaller fragments based upon structural epitopes. In some cases, of course, we didn't have the actual proteins, and so we had to use structural models. But using those models, we looked for contiguous sequences that potentially might be structured, but likely are not structured because they're fragments of the larger protein. And we took those and put those on the surface of a harmless virus called a phage so that they could be easy for us to do assays with. Okay, and I have to watch the time. So Professor Ishmael, feel free to give me a warning at some point, 5-minute warning. Thank you.
Sounds good.
All right, so we have these epitopes, and I showed you on the previous slide. Oh, I should have made notice of this. The different colored regions are the different epitopes. So again, those are fragments of the virus. And we have those arrayed on the surface of viruses called M13 phage, so we could set up assays. At the same time, we also had the full-length virus proteins from a technique called COVAM, which is a viral antigen microarray. This was done by our collaborators, Phil Feldner, also at UCI. And they're arrayed in these on microscope slides in a way that we can readily assay them. Okay, so we have both sections, and so we can start looking for antibodies against SARS-CoV-2 proteins in patient samples. And we did that. And before I tell you that, let me tell you a little bit about the patients. So we started with 86 patients. We're actually up to 186 patients at this point. But most of what I'll tell you about today is with 86 patients. And all these patients have COVID-19 confirmed by PCR. But I have to tell you, it's an uneven population diversity. In my area of the US, most of our patients are Hispanic, Latino, or Latina. We sometimes call such patients Latinx. And I think that, I'll be honest, that is indicative of health injustice in the US, that these are patients who also have higher comorbidities as well. And I'll talk to you about that in a moment. We also, what I'll tell you about today has not been published. It's under peer review now, but it has not been peer reviewed just yet. Okay, so what we found is looking at these patients, we found that there are a couple of epitopes that have a very strong antibody response. And I'm showing you that in blue. There's one in particular called epitope 9 that's going to be the focus. And here we're looking at all 86 patients. Here's the data, and you can see it's roughly 27%, and in the larger population, it's about 28% of patients have this epitope 9. And so this is a fragment of N protein, a nucleocapsid protein from SARS-CoV-2. And we could compare both techniques, the COVAM technique and the LISA technique, and both techniques are give us the same response. And so that's good because we have two orthogonal techniques that are giving us the same data. And that's useful because that indicates that our assay is working by two different methods. Okay, here's the important part. So what we find is that patients who have antibodies against this epitope 9, the nucleocapsid protein epitope, they have much more severe response to the virus. They spend more time in the hospital, and that's shown here on the right. You can see that these patients have a lot more time in the hospital, and contrast that against patients who have antibodies against the same protein, but not against this particular fragment of the protein in gray. So comparing blue and gray, and you can see that these patients have much more severe disease. And then in general, patients who have these antibodies have much more severe disease than patients who do not have such antibodies. Okay, additionally on the left, they also spend more time in the hospital. They have more symptomatic days. And then on the left, these patients also have much more severe outcomes. That's shown, if I can call your attention to this left box on the right, these are patients who have this antibody, and you can see they have much more ICU, intubation, and death, which again, we've defined as the hallmarks of severe COVID-19. Okay, now it turns out that so I thought, okay, maybe patients who have this might have encountered a similar coronavirus in the past, and that turns out not to be the case. Here are very common coronaviruses, and these patients do not have antibodies against those, against the same stretch, the homologous stretch or the orthologous stretch from these other coronaviruses, MERS and HKU23. Their antibodies do cross-react against SARS, the original SARS-CoV-1, but there were very few people worldwide who were infected with SARS-CoV-1, so it's unlikely that they encountered this virus. More likely, they're raising antibodies because their immune system has raised a flawed response. Okay, so in terms of immunology, these are patients who have an early IgG response. So this is, you may know that your immune system has two phases, early IgM response, and then a later IgG response. So IgG are the full-length bivalent antibodies. And the fact that we see this early IgG response is another indicator that this is antigenic original sin, meaning these are patients who encountered some sort of pathogen earlier in their lives and are responding to it, but are responding inappropriately. All right, let me just see what's going on in the chat just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, 5 minutes left. Okay, thank you, Professor Ishmael. Okay, so one last thing, we came up with this disease risk factor score. And if someone has, for example, cardiovascular diabetes, hypertension, and older age, they are 13-fold more likely to come down with severe outcomes than patients who do not have that, as long as they have the antibody. So it's antibody plus disease risk factor score very clearly gives us a differentiation of these patients. And what's neat is we can find this differentiation early in the course of the virus, sometimes even within 1 day. And so here I'm showing you that this disease risk factor score on the upper left, on the y-axis, this is the disease risk factor score, does not correlate with normal patients, but strongly correlates with patients who have this antibody. And that strong correlation leads to some more severe outcomes where I've ranked these as death as being the most severe outcome. Okay, so here's more statistics. Here's the 97% specificity if they have both the antibody and the high score. However, since this is found in a relatively small number of patients, the sensitivity is low because it's only in 25% patients to begin with. Okay, and then finally, what is this good for, right? Everyone wants to know, okay, so I know this, what do I do for my patients? We found that you can actually trace their IL-6 levels if they have this antibody, but not if they do lack the antibody in gray. And what that means then is you can use an anti-IL-6 therapy to help control their disease. And this is advantage. The earlier that you get into disrupting the cytokine storm, the better. And again, we can see this sometimes as early as one day. Okay, so this summarizes what I talked to you about today. Let me just show you very quickly where we're going with this. One thing is that we're really excited about applying this to more patients. And the most important thing is that if you have a platform for antibody testing, what I've told you can work readily to solve that. Additionally, we have our own platform. This is the phage tech device that I disclosed earlier in my talk and the conflict of interest. And we're interested in implementing this. This gives us very fast reading of cancer biomarkers. Additionally, we have an immunoblot. So that's something that could be developed very inexpensively, deployed very inexpensively. And we've been able to develop a 4-minute immunoblot to detect this antibody. And that's something that would be really useful. It's very inexpensive, it's very quick. It would be useful in low resource settings. Okay, let me thank people who made this work possible. I've already acknowledged the 3 women who led the team. Emily led the ELISA team. Sanjana Sen led the subcloning and epitope prediction team. And Kristen Gabriel led the production team that brought up the various phage and the antibodies and put the 2 together. And then finally, everyone else on this slide contributed something critical. And I'm really honored to work with all of them. I also want to thank the patients who provided their blood samples. These were collected under this institutional review board number here. Finally, the funding came from these groups on the left, including the Allergan Foundation, including various money from UC Office of the President and UCI. All right, thanks again for coming out today. It's a huge honor to speak to all of you. I'd be happy, I think I could take 1 or 2 questions. Is that right, Professor Ishmael?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Weiss, for this amazing presentation and for sharing your findings that have such current impact in the world that we live in today. So we have time for a couple of questions. If you have any question, you can either just open up.
May I tell you something, Nafisa? Let the question to the end. Please, the questions at the end, yes.
Got it.
Okay,
so we'll be
Thank you
asking
so
questions
much,
of the
Dr.
panelists.
Amin. We'll do that.
Thank you, Amal.
All righty, so we
Thanks
can
a
move to
lot.
our next speaker, Dr. Weiss, if you're okay with the introduction.
I am. In fact, I'm incredibly honored to introduce our next speaker, Professor Mohammed Zaman from Boston University in Boston, United States. Professor Zaman is a very distinguished scholar and scientist, so it gives me a great personal pleasure to introduce him to you today. He's a Howard Hughes Medical Institute Professor of Biomedical Engineering at Boston University. Incidentally, that's a very distinguished title. And also, incidentally, my mother was a graduate of Boston University. Today is International Day of Women, so I have to make reference to my mother. She was the first in her family to go to college, and Boston University was her alma mater. Anyway, Professor Zaman's laboratory focuses on developing solutions to improve access to quality healthcare in low-income settings, especially in refugee settlements. He has published over 130 peer-reviewed articles on this topic, and he has also co-authored 2 books aimed at broad audiences. One of his books looks at Global Challenges of Substandard and Counterfeit Drugs. It's called Bitter Pills, published in 2018. He also has a book published last year called Biography of Resistance that focuses on global drug resistance. And Professor Zaman has developed research and education programs focusing on refugee health at Boston University. He's co-founded a university-wide initiative on displacement in collaboration with academic, public, and private sectors focused in Lebanon, Uganda, and Colombia. So all around the world, he's had a huge impact. And then finally, he's written on this topic for newspapers worldwide. And he actually has a newspaper column that's appeared in over 30 countries and has been translated to languages. For this work, he's won numerous awards for teaching and research, the most recent being a very prestigious Guggenheim Fellowship in 2020 for his work on antibiotic resistance in refugee camps. So without further ado, Professor Zaman, welcome and thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Weiss, first for a fascinating talk, and second for this very generous introduction. My hope is that I'll stick to time, not only because I want to sort of stay within the time that is allocated, but also because I want to hear the other wonderful speakers that are coming after me. So please do interrupt as often and as needed. No problem with that. I want to talk to you, friends and colleagues, about trying to develop systems level approaches to understand and access to quality health services. It's a pity that I'm not there in person among friends, colleagues, and such inspirations, but I also recognize that we live in a very unique time. And as Professor Weiss mentioned earlier, whether you're dealing with COVID or other challenges, there's a disproportionate impact on those who are socioeconomically, racially, or historically disadvantaged. And one of the things that we want to address is using sort of multidisciplinary tools to address that concern. So my talk will sort of touch upon some of these factors. I want to start with sort of a picture of a refugee camp, not very far from where I grew up in Pakistan, a place where people just like you and me live, but who are struggling for some of the most basic and fundamental needs. And beyond the politics and economics, I feel that there's a role that scientists and engineers can play in improving their access to healthcare. When we look at the issue of displacement or forced displacement, we know that nearly 71 million people, and this number has increased as of last year to 79 million, are forcibly displaced from their homes. These are people largely who are now residing in low and middle income countries, not in rich countries, not in the United States, but in sort of countries that themselves have economic and development challenges. The country that I grew up in, Pakistan, continues to have a significant number of refugees from Afghanistan coming there. Of course, not everybody gets an opportunity to leave the international boundaries. Many of them are displaced within their own countries. The case in point in Yemen, not very far from where the organizers of this conference are, is a case in point. And that has become much worse since COVID-19 as well. We see that in Iraq, we see that in Syria, we see it elsewhere as well. In addition to the historic challenges of displacement, there are new challenges: politicization of COVID, not agreeing that this is a problem, not doing enough tests, reduction in international aid that has historically addressed these issues, and stress on health infrastructure that was already broken, along with global supply chains that are disrupted. I want to ask, and this is perhaps for all of us to think about, that why is it that so few people in science and technology and engineering and medicine look at these challenges, and how can we address it? And there are a number of issues there that are important and are waiting for more scientists and engineers and scholars to really address. These include ethically appropriate point of care technology that work for everyone, not one that works only for one kind of skin color or one kind of ethnicity. Issues of data access and privacy are remarkably important. Antimicrobial resistance that I'll talk about today, and of course, trauma and mental health. These are important questions well within the reach of scientists and engineers, somehow not getting adequate attention. I want to go back to this picture for a second and talk about one of the most important issues, and that is trust in a healthcare system. Based on long history of marginalization, vulnerability, economic collapse and colonialism, there is a huge issue of distrust. And there's an opportunity for scientists and engineers to address this aspect of trust through new innovations, as well as working across disciplinary boundaries. Of course, when we look at quality of care and the trust that lacks, COVID-19 has further eroded that. Now, let me go into specific sort of technological things that we are interested in. As we see in places of conflict, in places of economic vulnerability, there's a huge issue associated with the quality of medicines. Fake, substandard, counterfeit medicines have become the norm in many parts of the world. This is a picture from Syria. You can see that as the infrastructure collapses, the ability to have good quality drugs starts to become a problem. All across the world, you have issues of poor manufacturing, seen on the left. Drugs that are degraded by sitting in front of the supply chains, but never really entering the supply chains, on the right. Intentional falsification, bottom left, or poor regulation, bottom right. Anywhere from 10 to 30% of drug sales worldwide are substandard and counterfeit. Not only they increase mortality and morbidity, they also increase antimicrobial resistance. And that is something that I want to sort of talk about today. From a science perspective, we've been very interested in developing a link between quality of medicines and antimicrobial resistance, something that is perceived, but at a mechanistic level is not fully understood. What we ended up doing was to look at a particular drug known as rifampicin, used as a frontline drug, not only against TB, a problem seen commonly in low and middle income countries, but also used as an antibiotic. This is a product that often auto-degrades in the presence of sunlight, humidity, poor storage. And what we showed that there using simple assays was that rifampicin quinone, an impurity that is often a result of auto-degradation, can lead to increased resistance, both in E. coli and in Smegmatis. And what it does is, in small amounts of rifampicin quinone, that is very, very common in countries where there is no good infrastructure for drug quality control, can lead to resistance and cross-resistance. We've been able to identify specific mutations associated with these poor quality drugs, indicating specific issues that are associated not only in terms of poor adherence or lack of care, but the presence of poor quality medicines. This is also important because many people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged get poor quality medicines not because of choice, but because there is no choice left for them. Looking broadly, the issue of fluoroquinolones, we see that the global consumption of fluoroquinolones has increased. For example, in countries where I've had the pleasure of working, so on the top left is Massachusetts, where I live, the number over about 20-year period has remained more or less steady. On the other hand, in Lebanon, it has increased almost threefold. In Jordan, again, almost 3.5-fold, and in Pakistan, almost fourfold. So the consumption has increased by fourfold. At the same time, the quality has degraded, meaning that there is a greater chance of these communities to become vulnerable. This is a picture from a refugee camp pharmacy in northern Uganda, where I've had the pleasure of working. Absolutely no control of drug quality, no storage conditions. And I'm not sort of picking on that particular drug shop. I'm talking about the fact that ordinary people become vulnerable to this. So we took these drugs and we started to analyze and think about, can we do something about this issue? Can we detect poor quality medicines in the system and save vulnerable lives? And the answer is actually not that easy. There are existing solutions and existing technologies that are available, but either they're qualitative, and we know that we don't want a yes or no solution. We need to know how much is in there. A drug that has some active ingredient is not good enough. We need to have the exact amount of that active ingredient. Or they're too expensive, $30,000 to $50,000 for a single spectroscope, along with the library costs, or they are not customized for low-income settings. Out of that came a technology that is driven by a fundamental mission that no matter who you are, where you live, how much you earn, whether you're a single parent or have a large family, you should have access to quality medicines. This is the mission of the technology that we've been developing called PharmaCheck. And the idea here is fourfold. We need to understand where the problems are, not at a high level, but at a more specific level. We also need to innovate technology that works for people at all places. We need to integrate that into policy. And the long-term goal is to reduce the adverse health effects on vulnerable people and support economies. So how does this thing work? It's a little suitcase about 8 kilos or 9 kilos, and it accurately and affordably tests the quality of medicines at all points in the supply chain, from the first point, the entry dock, all the way to the point of sale. Remember that we don't want this to be a consumer technology, because that's not the goal. We don't want people to have the burden to test whether the drug that they already paid for is good or bad. We want the system to improve so it works for everyone. The way it works is there's a microfluidic system. You can put a pill in there that gets dissolved. It combines with a fluorescence tag. These are small DNA or RNA molecules, most commonly a DNA molecule that binds, changes configuration, gives off a signal. There is no sample prep. And this is a specific chemistry that works with these drugs. We work largely with antimalarials and antibiotics. The user experience is quite simple. There's a prepackaged, pre-developed cassette that you can put in, and that goes directly into the system. If you look inside the system, there's a dilution module, a lighting module, a disposable cartridge to make sure that we are also environmentally conscious, as well as reagent storage and delivery system. This can be stored directly, can be sent on a cloud, or can be printed as well. We've been able to sort of detect poor quality medicines across all of the antimalarial families, with the exception of SP. So basically all the artemisinin family, we can do that, along with, we can also measure their dissolution. In other words, the kinetic rate at which the drug is released from the pill. Even same drug with 2 different brands, we're able to do that through using of an ultrasound horn that allows for specific agitation and measurement. And we can do that in a matter of about 6 to 8 minutes. Here are some results from the work that we have done in Ghana, and we have published this as well. These are different sort of versions of artesunate, one of the antimalarials, monotherapies. We can also do that with combination therapies. And what we can do in this regard is you can demonstrate that we are able to, we're able to do that within 3 to 5% of HPLC. Remember, our technology, it's not in the market yet, but would be about 150th time the cost of an HPLC. And we are within 3 to 5%. We are not replacing HPLC, but rather what we are trying to do here is to provide an easier and a robust check at the front lines that allows for better separation. And with the current system that recommended by WHO, we are significantly better. Now we're working with policymakers and international aid agencies and local communities, because the current system of medicine quality check doesn't exist. And the idea is that we want to be able to put this at all points in the supply chain, to look at seasonal variations, to look at demand and supply, to look at how does the system really work when the drugs travel through the system, and really take out the drugs that are poor quality that can lead to antimicrobial resistance, as well as can impact the communities in an adverse way. I want to sort of move on to the last part of the talk. So we talked about the science, we talked about the engineering. Now we want to talk a little bit about policy. We want to get the medicines, the good medicines, to the most vulnerable as well. Here, I want to focus on the country, Yemen, not very far from where some of the organizers are, a country very, very dear to me personally. And we've been working there for about 4 years now. It's one of the worst humanitarian disasters in the world, driven by what I would call an immoral war. And the fact is that without taking political positions, the people who are suffering are ordinary people of Yemen who have not done anything wrong, who have not taken up any arms. My own friends and family members, family members of my own friends have lost lives and property. This continues to be the worst humanitarian crisis, driven by war, conflict, economic stress, and of course, climate change. And one of the things that we are doing is we are working very closely with UNICEF and other aid agencies on the ground, trying to understand where exactly all the vulnerabilities. So we sort of look at the data coming from the ground and then model it using a Markov model process to be able to say that in various seasons, these are some of the challenges that you may have with malnutrition, with increased rates of pneumonia, and how do you get the right medicines at the right place and at the right time to be able to prepare for that. I want to spend the last 2 minutes in thinking about and hoping that we'll have a longer conversation on this, the opportunity to work across disciplinary boundaries and with many colleagues who are present here. Our focus is that to be able to take these things and bring them to the classroom. And as we have seen with Zoom, there are many challenges, but there's also an opportunity to work across disciplinary boundaries, across time zones, across continents, and across the various countries. We want our students to be exposed to the grandest challenges of our time: refugee health and well-being, urbanization, antibiotic resistance. We want the students to be able to do this work in and out of the classroom, at the forefront of these challenges. And we want our students to engage with rigor beyond disciplinary boundaries. We have started working with sort of these integrated model in Lebanon, in Uganda, in Colombia, and I would be very interested in working with other colleagues in other areas as well. Some of our colleagues have developed technologies that are now being used. And I want to end, and I'm cognizant of time, is where are we headed with this? We want to develop tools that are fit for purpose of discovery, analysis, and impact, not another tool that was developed for something and is being force fit for that. Got it. We want to improve quality health services, not just health services, but the desire for quality health services. Of course, environment continues to play a major role. Some of that environment is destroyed because of conflict, some of that because of poverty, and we want to address that. And finally, the fact that millions of people are forced out of their homes, creating new health challenges. How do we address that issue using a combination of strategies rooted in science, engineering, social science, and humanities at environment, conflict, migration nexus? With that, I will end and look forward to the discussion towards the end of the session. Thank you very much.
That was great. That was great. Thank you so much, Professor Zaman. That was terrific. Really inspiring. And I'm sure everyone has lots of questions, but I would ask you to hold your questions to the very end, and then the panelists will answer the questions all together all at once. And I'm going to go straight on to our next speaker, Professor Ishmael from University of Ottawa in Canada. And I'm really excited about her topic. She's going to be talking to us today about probiotics to attempt to block stress-induced depression, anxiety-like behaviors in male and female mice. This is obviously relevant to today's world where we are all experiencing greater levels of anxiety. Before she gets to that, though, let me talk to you a little bit about her background, which is quite impressive. Professor Ishmael is a professor at the School of Psychology at University of Ottawa, and she holds one of these prestigious university research chairs, specifically in the area of stress and mental health. She is a graduate of Concordia University and then did postdoctoral studies at the University of Massachusetts before joining the University of Ottawa in 2012. She is an expert in neuroimmunology and neuroendocrinology, and she was recently awarded the Young Researcher of the Year by the University of Ottawa and an Early Researcher Award by the province of Ontario. She is also a member of the GYA, the Global Young Academy, which thrills me tremendously because that's a really great organization that connects scholars and scientists from around the world and builds bridges among scientists. So I'm really thrilled that she's part of that important organization. Okay, without further ado, Professor Ishmael, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Weiss, for this beautiful introduction. It's truly an honor to be here, to be able to share my work with you all. It would have been lovely to be able to be there in person, but I'm still really, really glad to be able to share my findings with you virtually. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my slides. So as Dr. Weiss mentioned, the title of my presentation is How Exposure to Probiotics Can Block Stress-Induced Depression-like and Anxiety-like Behaviors in Male and Female Mice. Depression can affect anyone. It is one of the most widespread illnesses, often coexisting with other morbidities. Depression is currently the third leading cause of disability worldwide, but according to the World Health Organization, it will become the leading cause of disability around the world by 2030. However, we do know that the current pandemic has exacerbated cases of depression, and we expect depression to become the leading cause of disease burden earlier than 2030, unfortunately. The problem is that even though this disease is so widespread, little is known about its pathophysiology. And because of that, we unfortunately don't have very effective treatments against depression. We see that at least a third of the patients suffering from depression appear to be treatment resistant. And it's not really something to do with the patients per se, but rather the fact that we have been unable to develop treatments that have been effective in all cases of depression. We know a little bit though about depression. For instance, we do know that it is associated with a dysfunction in monoamine neurotransmission. We've been studying that most widely for the past few decades. And the current pharmacological treatments that we have concentrate on trying to regulate monoamine neurotransmission. But given that these treatments have not been effective, this suggests that there is more to depression than simply a dysfunction in monoamine neurotransmission. For instance, we know that certain stressful life experiences can induce depression and anxiety. And here I'm referring to stressful life experiences that will not only affect the stress system, but also impact the immune response. So I'm thinking about psychosocial stressors, abuse, etc. We also know that most cases of depression and anxiety tend to begin during puberty and adolescence, with a mean age onset of 14 years of age. And we also know that as of puberty and adolescence, girls and women become 2 times more likely to developing depression. So in my lab, we've been really intrigued by the fact that puberty appears to be a vulnerable period for the onset of mood-related disorders like depression and anxiety. And we also wonder why girls and women become 2 times more susceptible to developing these mood disorders. We know that it's beyond the natural circulating hormones. Hormones do play a role, but it's not the answer to the story. There is much more to it here that needs to be investigated. So to investigate this issue with my students, we developed an animal model in which we examine first whether we can use a pubertal stressor that will induce depression in this mouse model. So we treated our mice, both male and female mice, with lipopolysaccharide, which I'm now going to refer to as LPS. Lipopolysaccharide, or LPS, is a bacterial endotoxin that is isolated from the cell wall of gram-negative bacteria. In our case, it's the E. coli bacteria. And this endotoxin is going to bind to toll-like receptor 4 that is located on the cell wall of various cells, and there it's going to activate an immune cascade that is going to lead to the production and release of cytokines. Many different cytokines, pro and anti-inflammatory cytokines. So in our study, we had mice arrive to our lab at 3 weeks of age, just as they were being weaned. And then at 6 weeks of age, they received either an injection of LPS, lipopolysaccharide, or saline. We chose 6 weeks of age because several studies in our lab have pointed towards 6 weeks of age being a stress-sensitive pubertal period, where exposure to stress specifically during this period has enduring consequences both on the brain and behavior. So following this, then we let the animals age and become adults. And at 10 weeks of age, we began behavior testing. Here we expose the mice to the forced swim test, which consists in putting the mice in 3 liters of water at room temperature and examining the duration of immobility. So eventually when we put the mice in there, they stop fighting and they become immobile, at which point they just float on the surface. And it is believed in the literature that the increased duration of immobility is associated with increased behavioral despair, a hallmark symptom of depression. And what our work showed is that females that were treated with LPS at 6 weeks of age displayed significantly greater immobility than mice that were just treated with saline controls, suggesting that in these females, being treated with lipopolysaccharide at 6 weeks of age induced depression-like behavior. We didn't see this in the males. And so then we exposed them to testing related to anxiety-like behavior, where we used two paradigms, the elevated plus maze and the open field arena. The elevated plus maze, as it says in the name, is a plus-shaped maze that is elevated from the ground and consists of two open arms and two closed arms. When animals are anxious, they spend more time in the closed arms, but when they're not so anxious, they adventure into the open arms. The open field arena follows a similar concept where there is a center area and a peripheral area. The more anxious the animals are, the more time they're going to spend hugging the walls and being in the peripheral area. And if they're less anxious, then they are going to adventure in the center portion of the arena. So we measured how much time the animals were spending in the open versus closed arms of the elevated plus maze and in the center portion or the peripheral portion of the open field arena. And what we found is that in the females, there was not much of a change in the time that the females spend in the open arms of the elevated plus maze or in the inner zone of the open field. There was no significant difference here, suggesting that the LPS treatment in these females did not lead to any anxiety-like behavior. But the story was different for the males. For the males, we did see that those that were treated with LPS at 6 weeks of age displayed a significant decrease in the time spent in the open arm of the elevated plus maze, and they also spent less time in the inner zone of the open field arena, suggesting here that LPS at 6 weeks of age did induce anxiety-like behavior in the males. And so far, our findings are showing that LPS treatment at 6 weeks of age seems to induce depression-like behavior in our mouse model in the females, and it seems to be inducing anxiety-like behavior in the males. And these effects were really limited to LPS treatment at 6 weeks of age because when we treated the mice in adulthood with LPS, there was no change in depression-like behavior or anxiety-like behavior in the males and females. We also then examined cortisol levels in the males and the females after they had been treated with LPS at 6 weeks of age. So in adulthood, we presented them with a restrained stress, and we saw that in the males, there was a significant increase in corticosterone levels in mice that were treated with LPS at 6 weeks of age, although now they're adults, compared to saline controls. But there was no such difference in corticosterone levels in females, whether they were treated with LPS or saline. So just to summarize the findings so far, we see that pubertal LPS treatment induces depression-like behavior in females and anxiety-like behavior in males in adulthood. We also see that males treated with LPS during puberty seem to be sensitized in terms of the stress response when we expose them to a heterotopic stressor, which was the restrained stress. We observed no behavioral alterations here in the adult animals, so it's really limited to the pubertal period. And so we wondered, why are these effects limited to this period, and what renders puberty a vulnerable period? So we then examined to see if there were indeed differences in the acute response to the immune challenge. And we found that there are. So the adult animals display more sickness behavior when they're treated with LPS than do our pubertal animals. They display greater changes in body temperature. They display greater corticosterone and cytokine concentration. And they display also greater brain activation following LPS treatment compared to pubertal animals. suggesting that the pubertal mice are actually hypo-responsive to the immune challenge, which may be detrimental or maladaptive in terms of mental health later on. We also noted important sex differences in immune response, where males were displaying greater immune response than the females. So our pubertal females are actually the ones that are the most hypo-responsive when it comes to an acute immune challenge, and more vulnerable to enduring changes in the brain and the behavior then following this immune challenge. We then moved to the gut-brain axis to see what the impact of LPS was on the gut. I don't want to spend too much time since we're running out of time, but I'm just going to go ahead and show you our findings, where we found that when the animals are simply exposed to a controlled broth, the females continue to display anxiety, a depression-like behavior when they are treated with LPS. But when we give them kefir during puberty for 2 weeks, around the time that we give them LPS, we block this LPS-induced depression-like behavior. We also noted something similar when it came to anxiety-like behavior. So those exposed to the control broth continued to display increased anxiety-like behavior, the males, in both the elevated plasmase and open field, but this was blocked by pubertal kefir treatment. So kefir does seem to be inducing long-lasting protection against stress-induced depression-like behavior in females, anxiety-like behavior in males, but we need to investigate this further in terms of mechanism. I'm gonna go ahead and just move on to my acknowledgement slide. So with that, I would like to thank everyone from my lab who contributed towards this data collection, my numerous graduate students that are part of the lab, the undergraduate students, the visiting international students that we're so happy to welcome every year, the University of Ottawa, Faculty of Social Sciences, School of Psychology for their support, and CERC for funding our work, the mice for contributing to this data collection, and you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ishmael. That was terrific. Really awesome research. I'm sure, again, that there's a lot of questions, but I'm going to ask everyone to hold their questions till the panel at the very end, and then we'll all get a chance to ask you a question then, okay? So,
perfect, thank you.
And I think I'll turn things over to you to introduce our next speaker. Are you ready for that, or do you want me to do it? Okay,
no,
you're ready.
It's perfect. I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay. So I am delighted to share with you, to introduce to you our next speaker. Our next speaker is Dr. Fadwa Al-Haika. She is an associate professor of psychiatry, mental health, as well as the dean of faculty of nursing in Philadelphia University, Jordan. She finished her PhD in nursing from the University of East Anglia, UK in 2013. Her research interests are health policy, adherence, mental health problems, chronic disease, health technology, and nursing sciences. She has more than 35 research papers that were published in high prestigious journals. And she's also a treasurer of OWSD Jordan chapter. She's a board member of Psychological Sciences Association in Jordan, and also a member of Cochrane Hypertension Group. She has more than 30 TV shows and broadcasting news, and she's been an active person with volunteering work in Jordan. I am sure that you've been extremely busy and called upon in this challenging time, and we are really, really excited to hear about your work. So welcome, Dr. Al-Haika, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nasifa, for this introduction, and I'm really happy to be a part of this forum. And thanks for University of Dahouk and Women in Science Without Border Initiative for having this a great forum with you. It's actually a proposal come from idea with my other discipline colleagues in engineering faculties. Because you see in the currently, as a result of pandemic and epidemic, many people got to the hospital. And for this purpose, we think what we can do to reduce the workload which will be faced by the healthcare professional. We use internet-based of things, which is actually a network of physical object things that are embedded with sensors, software, and other technology for the purpose of connecting and exchanging with other devices and system of internet without human computer actions. This it's currently used with healthcare in different countries, the community, mainly to reduce the cost of direct contact with the patients. Also, because of this epidemic, we need people. If we need healthcare provider, we need to pay them, so it's costly. We need expensive and like mechanical ventilator and equipment. So we think what we can do to protect healthcare provider from direct contact with the patients, because you know, frontline healthcare provider like nurses and physicians, they are susceptible to get the infection. So how we can do this with the protection of them? Most of them fear to contact directly with the patients, so they have workload of pressure in addition to psychological pressure. To reduce of that, we think about something to collect the data that needed from the patients, mainly who have confirmed cases of disease like COVID-19 cases. So we formulate and propose a mechanism of action for a machine that connect all the data from the patients, okay, to be low, because we are in the Middle East looking for something with low cost. So we need a not expensive machine. We need it to be simple design. We need it to maintain and continuous monitoring and assessments and intervention for the patients, can be easily, quickly manufactured, and also doesn't cause any harm or risk for the patients. This is the proposal or mechanism for the machine could be important for 24 hours real-time monitoring for the patients. Also could be used remotely without the presence of the healthcare provider with direct contact with the patients, through connecting of the data by the wireless sensors network. So the architecture for the expected monitoring system with patients in the isolating room, we can connect him with ECG sensors monitoring, okay? We can connect him with sensors for body temperature. We can connect them with the auto saturation, which the machines can be measures the level of the oxygen in the blood. Also, we can connect them with the spirometer. This is spirometer, it's part of the machine which used to determine the level of the function of the lung. And by using this spirometer, we can determine how the lung is work. If there is any disease like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease or any disease affect the lung, we can detect it. Also, we can connect the patients with oxygen supplement. All these vital signs and measures can be connected through sensors, very simple sensors. Then all the data will be collected through and send it through the remotely, maybe through the wireless could be, and it could be through the wire to the machine, which able to interpret these parameters. Based on the interpretation of the parameters, the physician can receive the data in the computer or in his iPad, and based on that, it can be intervene and provide appropriate intervention. So the sensors, body temperature sensors, oxygen saturation sensors, ECG, electrocardiogram sensors, and spirometers sensors. Patients connected to the sensor connected to the real-time controller, which can be interpret the data into normal and abnormal, then send it to the physician who can control to intervene, increase O2 sat, and other mechanisms. Here we can see O2 flow meter. We can expect what's the main elements, okay? After taking all the data from the patients through the sensors which connected, the microcontroller control algorithm, which determine the normal and abnormal parameters, could be decided whether to give a normal O2 oxygen level to maintain to the patients, and also it could be start to ventilate the patient through the CPAP mask, which usually used for a patient who have severe abnormality in his lung, like chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, and also like coronavirus patients in severe cases. It could be used by power charge, okay, and also it could be used by connection of these sensors into electricity, but it could be charged for around 16 hours to continuous using of these sensors. Regarding the intervention, okay, because the patient's data sent to the physician then can be managed these. There is a valve, it could be control how much of oxygen could be sent to the patients to determine the level of oxygen. And also we have a ventilator line, which is CPAP mask, okay? This is also could be used in case severe hypoxemia and other parameters show that the patients need severe intervention like CPAP mask. This is the software of flow chart for the spirometer units, how we interpret it, because the spirometer, as I told you, it's a machine could be used to determine how the lung is used. Usually it's determine how we can exhale by forced exhalation. If the level of exhalation is minimum or below the normal limits, this means the function is not work well. So the physician can intervene and determine the appropriate managements for the patients. Also, based on the body temperature, we can interpret the body temperature if it's normal or above or below normal, and determine what's the next step by the physician to have to do for the patients. Also, this is for the O2 sat. If reduced below the 70, by introducing physician order into the machines, it could be sent electronically back to the patients, and could the patient start to use CPAP mask, which is in severe cases when the O2 sat reduced below the normal level. High level of overview for this connection, we can see how we can use all the data sent through remotely into the clouds and in the server, then by interpretation, go to the doctor and physician, and he can data visualization from anywhere remotely by the physician, and can he set another data, return back this data to the patients, and by controlling of the valve for the mask of oxygen and for the CPAP mask. And we can also control for the room temperature if there is hypothermic temperature, and or for reduced temperature of the room in case of hyperthermia. This is the Internet-based of Things monitoring prototype has been tested to make sure that all elements and components work properly and to check its functionality, reliability, and performance. This implemented prototype has been sensor work wirelessly without main unit, which offer wireless communication between patient sites and healthcare center through the internet. We use by simulation, we find it could be used actually and effectively for using with patients who have lung disease, mainly restrictive one like coronavirus or COVID-19 patients. Conclusion, if we implement this design, we will get a real-time healthcare monitoring for 24 hours, mainly for epidemic patients. We can reduce infection of frontline healthcare professional and reduce the healthcare workload and psychological impact on them. Also, it could be used in the clinical setting and non-clinical setting like camp and home. This device can be also used for real-time monitoring and assisting of healthcare provider in elderly at home by taking advantage of the web capabilities and wireless sensor provided by this system to communicate directly with a specialist remotely. Actually, this device, it could be, it's cost effective in terms of the expensiveness cost of the healthcare providing. Also, it could be used for more implementation and improved through the use of advanced wireless module and intelligent control methodology. I would like to thank my colleague, Professor Qasim Al-Ubaidi and Dr. Abdel Latif Al-Awadi, who try their best effort to get this proposed internet-based of thing machine to be done for the patients. And thank you a lot for listening. And I'm really waiting your questions to exchange our information with each other. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much, Dr. Al-Halakaya. It's truly a pleasure to hear your interesting findings and to learn about the technology that you're putting forward to help those in need and to facilitate diagnoses in the medical system. So thank you very, very much for this. I'm sure that our participants have many questions, but I'll ask everyone to hold off your questions towards the end of the panel. And last but not least, I am truly honored to introduce to you our final speaker, Dr. Franco M. Cabrizio. Is a research member of the National Scientific and Technical Research Council in Argentina and an associate professor at the National University of San Martin in Argentina. Briefly, he holds a Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry that he obtained in 2002. He got a PhD in Chemical Sciences in 2005 from the National University of La Plata. He's also he was a postdoctoral fellow in 2005 to 2006. And throughout his career, Dr. Cabrizio has carried out multiple research stays at several prestigious institutions in Germany, Japan, Denmark, and China. And in 2006, he was appointed as a research member of CONICET. And in 2010, he took the position as the director of the Photochemistry and Molecular Photobiology Research Group at INTEC. In 2013, he was appointed the associate professor at UNSAM, and he's a member of the executive committee of TWAS Young Affiliates Alumni Network since 2016. He's also a member of the executive council of TWAS, and his current research focuses on understanding the molecular aspects of mechanisms underlying the processes triggered by UVA and or visible light. So with that, Dr. Cabrizio, we are truly, truly honored to have you here today. You can begin when you are ready.
Thank you for this presentation. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The honor is mine. It's, in particular because this special day. So this is my pleasure to be here today. Let's work together to get more women in leadership. So after listening to the previous wonderful presentation, I just decided to focus in the scientific part, and also because of the time. So I'm going to share with you some specific results of what we've been doing in our lab. We mainly use concepts and tools from all these field of knowledges, but as you mentioned, we are focused on the photochemistry and photobiology. In particular, we study and we try to characterize the properties of a series of natural occurring alkaloids. It's not working. 1 minute. They call beta carbolines. These are naturally and widely spread compounds. They are present in animals, plants, several kind of microorganisms. And this is just a short list of what we've been studying, but they have a lot of properties. And what we do is mainly to characterize the excited state of these molecules, either singlet or triplet state. We understand, try to understand and quantify their spectroscopic pattern, the activation pathways. I mean, emission could be fluorescence, phosphorescence, their ability to produce, to photoinduce production of reactive oxygen species, such as singular oxygen, their capability to induce damage on different kind of targets. And during the last about 15 years, we've been working on this. We've been characterizing a large number of molecules, and now we have a series of, we have the understanding and we know what to change and what to do into the main molecular ring. This is the main molecular ring of the beta carboline. This is an indolic ring and this is a pyridinic ring. And now we know what to change, what it could be halogenations, methylation, or other small changes that can enhance or reduce specific properties. We can enhance their fluorescence or emission capabilities. We can enhance their photosensitizing properties and capabilities, and so on. So with all this information in mind, a few years ago we started to explore different sort of biotechnological application of these alkaloids, as I mentioned before. I mean, since we knew and we know what to change in order to improve any particular property, we explore different areas. But today I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we've been doing regarding to the design, the use of these alkaloids for the design and preparation of drug delivery system in photodynamic therapy. Briefly, photodynamic therapy needs 3 major components. I mean, the incident light. This is a modified Jablonski diagram. The photosensitizers, I mean, the molecule that can interact with the light, that can absorb the light, and oxygen from the tissues. There are many other molecular mechanisms, but the most relevant is the production of reactive oxygen species, could be singular oxygen. And this particular reactive species can induce direct damage on the target, on the tissues, inducing necrosis or apoptosis, or can also cause a destruction of the tumor vasculature and produce the acute immunoresponse. So there are many other mechanisms, but this is the general concept of what we're doing. This is not a new story. I mean, at the beginning of the previous century, Niels Finsen was awarded with a Nobel Prize because the use of this therapy to treat some cutaneous tuberculosis. But it was in the 70s when they started to use, as clinical trials. And since then, this kind of therapy has been used, used to treat different kind of pathologies, skin cancer, other non-cancerous skin disorders, other, I would say, internal type of cancers, and is especially recommended for patients with a high surgical risk. There is a large set of molecules already approved and that under use, in clinical trials, this is depending on the type of tumors or pathology. People use different kind of photosensitizers, but most of them are related to the porphyrin rings. And these are, I would say, the first generation of photosensitizers. But all these drugs has, I would say, a sort of side effects. I mean, because they lack, all of them lacks of selectivity. So they can, we know that they can induce damage not only on the tumor cells, but also on the surrounding normal or non-cancerous tissues. So the next generation of the photosensitizers include a sort of drug delivery, smart and selective delivery system. There are different strategies to explore that. Most of them, or some of them, include the direct attach or linked, covalently linked the photosensitizers and a particular structure that can be selectively recognized by the target cell. Could be antibodies or could be folic acid. And I'm gonna just make some comments on the folic acid because this is what we use today in this research line. Tumor cells, almost all the tumor cell lines overexpress this folic acid receptor. And on the contrary, regular or non-cancerous cells do not express such kind of receptor. Just it's only confined to or limited to activated macrophages and some other regular cells. So it's a nice target. So and there is something already done with this major idea. I mean, the idea is just to link to conjugate the active drug with some. This is just a linker with the folic acid, and you can find in the literature and also some applications different kind of structures with low, middle, and large sizes. It depending on and all of them has, I would say, its pros and cons. And the major cons is I want to highlight this. It's just the lack of, again, the lack of selectivity. These drugs can be uptaken by the tumor cells, not only through, I mean, or mediated by this folate receptor, but also through to passive diffusion or other kind of mechanisms. So a few years ago, Professor Ben Eppe and Katrin Budbach from Germany, they were working on this project. They were working on the design and synthesis of these large, I would say, conjugate and structures. It's mainly based on albumin. This in green, the albumin conjugated to the large number of folic acids. And they were testing different kind of sensitizers. They just wanted to prove at that time that these sort of structures can be selectively uptaken by the tumor cells, something that was not proven at the time. We started to work together in this project, and for some reason that I'm not going to get into so much detail today, but they started to try small molecules. They decided to prove and to test small molecules as photosensitizers. So there's a problem here. 1 minute. Sorry, I have a problem with the presentation. 1 minute, please. I have to share it again, sorry.
No problem at all.
One minute, please. It should work right now. Can you see the picture? Yeah.
Yes, perfect.
Good. So then we with all the knowledge we had at the time about these small molecules, we choose these two particular structure, one that has a large capability or a huge, high capability to induce or to emit fluorescence. It's a large, it's a good fluorophore here, and another structure that we knew at the time that it was a good photosensitizer. I mean, good molecule that upon excitation could induce a large amount of damage on the target cells. So what we did is just something, we have this small tail because we need the carboxylate groups just to conjugate with the proteins, and we tested. We did some tests to evaluate if this new structure remained the fluorescent capability and also their capability to induce and to produce singlet oxygen molecule. And it was, and the team started to move on with the synthesis of this large structure, and we move on with the characterization. This is just some mass spectrometry, and we could identify that per each albumin we could get about 7 and 9 folic acid conjugated, I mean covalently linked, and the photosensitizers. And the photosensitizer, both of them. This is the fluorescence one and the no harming nucleus, and this is the harming nucleus, the one that can induce a large amount of damage. We also move on with characterization. This is just electrophoresis. You can see here the fluorescence conjugate. This is the conjugate. Please have in mind this name: no harmine, albumin, and folic acid. And this is the other structure. So with this structure in our hand, we just tested their capability to photoinduce damage, just in order to understand if they were working, of if they work according to what we were expecting. We have a different kind of experiment. This is just an in vitro assay. We can test the relaxation of the DNA upon any treatment, and in combination with different specific enzymes, we can understand what type of damage is induced in the DNA. And here you can see the number of lesions in the DNA, and we tested 2 types of lesions just for this picture, of course. Single strand break here, you can see here, and oxidative damage in the purine bases when the DNA is irradiated in the presence of increasing amount of each of the photosensitizers. And what you can see is that this structure remain their highest, I mean, capability to induce damage. You can observe the same amount of damage, but using about 30 times lower concentration. But more interestingly is that when we tested the conjugate, I mean the drug, the photosensitizer covalently linked with albumin, this structure completely lost their capability to induce any damage. And this is just keep in mind for the next slides, but this is important because we are creating a sort of safe delivery system. I mean, it needs to be released. The photosensitizers need to be released in order to recover their photodynamic activity. What we did later on is, I mean, we just tested their capability to go into the cell. I mean, the cell uptake, the uptake of this particular structure using the fluorescent marker here. And we could prove that even after 15 or 90 minutes, the conjugate goes into the cells, and any other structures that do not have this folic acid attached, almost, I mean, there is nothing inside the cell. Using different markers, we could just prove that the localization of this conjugate is inside the lysosome. I mean, they goes into the lysosomes. And we also proved, with different experiments, we also proved that that this uptake was really selective. What was mediated by these folate receptors. Look at this. This is the localization or the internalization of the conjugate, and this is the same experiment in the presence of a large amount of free folic acid that can compete for the receptors. So there is nothing inside. This is another control. We use another cell lines that do not express these folate receptors, so there is nothing inside. And after that, we just moved into the most, I would say, important experiment. We just wanted to test their capability to kill the tumor cell. And this is, unfortunately, this is what we saw at the time. we could see a reduction of the viability of the cells up to 30%. It's not that high, but we were happy because we could demonstrate that was selective, because I mean, we need at the time, we need the presence of the folic acid in order to induce any, look at this, there is no reduction in the viability when we use the other conjugates. Of course, we need light to induce this damage. It means that with this in mind, and many other or other control experiments, we just modulated what was going on at that time, and we just were able to identify. We demonstrated that we could create a structure. I would say a safe structure in terms of it's not photoactive. I mean, mainly the protein quenched the excited state of the sensitizers and nothing happens, no matter how much light absorbs. It goes into the cells, mediated. This is an uptake mediated by these folate receptors, goes into the lysosome. Inside the lysosomes, the drug is released and induce all the photosensitizers recover the activity. With this in mind, the next step was just to move on and say, okay, we know that the delivery system is working. Let's try to find a better photosensitizer. And during the last 4 years or 5 years or so, we were testing several derivatives, many different derivatives. I just wanted to share with you only this small set of compounds just to show to show how a very tiny modification can induce a large change in photophysics or photochemical properties of these molecules. This is again the fluorescence ring, the no-harming ring, and this is the non-fluorescence or the photoactive or the photosensitizer, you know, and just by adding methyl group either in the nitrogen 2 or nitrogen 9 or both, we could see large differences. Look at this. For example, to get the same amount of damage, those molecules who has the methyl group at position 9 induce, I mean, we need much less concentration to induce the same damage. Look at it, this is about 2 micromolar of this drug to induce the same damage. And for this, in this case, we need about 100 micromolar. So this is really important. And in the insert, you can see the same results. This is the lesions on the DNA, the same results for when we use the harming ring, you know, this is the compound here. Again, we can see the same amount of damage, but even with lower concentration. So in the end, we were able to find a series of good candidates that we are now testing. We are building a new delivery system. We did that, and we are having great results, and I hope I can share this in the next presentation with you. I'm not gonna get into any details about this, but this is another thing that we are doing in our lab. We are using the same strategy or the same concept, but not to treat tumor cells. It's just to treat parasites. We want to attenuate them in a selective manner. I mean, we want to just to destroy or block particular specific capabilities of these parasites in order to develop many different biotechnological tools that, of course, could be also a vaccine to treat this parasite. All this work was done in cooperation, I mean, with a really large number of colleagues and current members, former members of the lab, but also in cooperation with people from abroad. There are some flags that are missing, but I need to improve this. This is a longer story, just done in cooperation with several colleagues all around the world. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very, very much for this very interesting and informative talk, Dr. Cabrera-Rizzo. We can now open the floor to questions. Dr. Weiss, would you like to answer, to take over the question period?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. Thank you for that. And thank you to all the speakers for fantastic presentations. It's been truly a wonderful morning session. Morning for me, of course, evening for you, perhaps evening for you, but it's been really fun. Okay, so why don't I get started by addressing questions that are in the Q&A, and may I encourage everyone to put your questions into the Q&A section. We'll also take raised hands, but maybe I'll just start with these Q&A questions first. The first one I think is for you, Professor Ishmael. The scientist asked, this is from Dr. Akintolo, who asks you, I just want you to confirm whether the use of caffeine in the pubertal period reduces the risk of depression and anxiety in adulthood based on your presentation. The individual goes on to say, I would have thought overuse from chronic use of caffeine can lead to anxiety. Please kindly throw more light on this. Thank you.
Absolutely. Increased use of caffeine does increase and exacerbate anxiety symptoms. My research was focusing on kefir, which is a cocktail of probiotics. And so at this point, we weren't able to tease out which specific probiotic bacteria was beneficial at reducing stress-induced depression-like behavior and stress-induced anxiety-like behavior. But what the presentation was showing is that it's kefir, the mixture of several probiotic bacteria during the pubertal period that can have enduring protective effects into adulthood.
Oh, wow. I better start eating that then. That's great. Thank you. That's super helpful. All right. Let me get the next question then from Fadwa, and I apologize. I don't want to mangle your last name, but I think I could get your first name somewhat correct. I see that your hand is up. Do you want to ask your question? You could just unmute yourself.
It's okay. Thank you. Actually, the question is for you. Okay. You said that the AB9 it's correlated with the increased severity of the condition. And I'm asking you whether, because you're a group of participants from different backgrounds, did you correlate the background with the AB9? And do you find, is there any correlation between the backgrounds and the increasing of P9 or not? Because most of the participants from Latino, as you said.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for that question, Fadwa. It's a really interesting one. Yes, we did look at that. And we found that it doesn't correlate very well. So someone's ethnicity, for example, doesn't correlate very well with their COVID-19 severity. But instead, what really correlates is if they have diabetes, cardiovascular condition, or are old. So old we defined as greater than 70 years old. So if they're older than 70, their chance of getting a much more severe disease goes up enormously. And then when you start combining that with diabetes and then cardiovascular, it leaves someone very vulnerable. Anyway, I hope I've answered your question. Thank you very much for asking.
Okay, but do you have any suggestion or recommendation regarding how we can control or how we can this results impact or implemented in the practice, how we can use it in the research, in the fields, in the community?
Yes. Thanks for asking. I would love to do that. So we discovered this thing a couple of months ago, and I went to my colleagues who are running this very busy COVID-19 clinic, and I told them, hey, this is going to be the best thing. And you're overwhelmed. I actually had to help build a field hospital, like a hospital made out of tents in the parking lot of our very elaborate hospital. Our state-of-the-art hospital suddenly needs a field tents in the front to help manage the huge number of patients. Our ICUs were filled to the brim. We actually expanded ICUs. So I told them, all right, look, here's this thing. And they told me to get lost. They told me they didn't have time to implement something in the middle of such a serious medical condition, that they couldn't give me the time. They couldn't give me any time whatsoever. And I think that's the first thing, is to find good partners. And then the second thing is to simplify it as much as possible. And I was very inspired by our second talk today in that simplification. right? Taking something and making it as simple as possible. So it's directed by that. We've been trying to make a system that can be much, much easier to implement that will use something called an immunoblot. So this is a technology that doesn't get used a lot, but should, because it actually works very, very well. It's been implemented for dengue fever, and it's used a lot in resource poor settings. And I think it could be enormously useful for something like this. So hopefully I've answered your question there. Is that what you, does that answer your question?
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Okay, thank you very much for asking. Okay, so let's see, checking now. I just want to make sure I'm not missing any hands that are up. I'd like to ask a question to Professor Ishmael. Why do you think probiotics, what is the hypothesis for probiotics as a alleviator of depression?
Thank you for this very interesting question. What we think is that stress exposure is increasing the permeability of the gut lining, as well as increasing the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. And so with this increased permeability, we're getting toxins that are leaving the gut when they shouldn't, and they should remain in the gut and be eliminated. But now we find them in the periphery. Once they enter in the periphery, with this increased permeability of the blood-brain barrier, these toxins are entering the brain, causing neuroinflammation. And during the pubertal period, where the brain is undergoing so much remodeling and reorganizing that is part of normal development, the neuroinflammation that is there is interfering with these normal processes. And it is with that we're increasing the vulnerability to certain mental illnesses in an enduring manner. And this is why we still find it in adulthood. So if we're able to do something early on during puberty to maintain the integrity of the gut lining and also the integrity of the blood-brain barrier, we could then increase the resilience of individuals going forward when they're faced with stress or immune challenges.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm really inspired myself because obviously immune challenges and work from home over the course of a whole year have taken their toll. So thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right, let me see. So again, I invite everyone to please put questions into the Q&A or just simply raise your hand or put them in the chat. I'm monitoring all three. Let me ask a question just to keep the questions rolling here. I have a question for Professor Zaman. I really was impressed by the progress you've made in your really beautiful work. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you went about implementing this. You make this great discovery, but how do you convince NGOs and others to actually spend money on something that's going to help improve medicines rather than spending money on better medicines? So can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's a great question, Dr. Weiss. I think one of the things that we have learned the hard way is sort of this notion of push and pull mechanism that comes from science. So oftentimes you discover something and you try to take it to the market, called the push mechanism. We, on the other hand, have largely been interested in the pull side of the thing. So working closely with colleagues on the ground and identifying problems from there on, and then bringing them to the lab. What that has allowed us is that we have what I would call sort of organic ground support for these questions. That doesn't take away from the question that you're asking, that we still need to do a lot of convincing. That said, we can argue that people on the ground are saying these challenges affect them. And one of the things that we often don't do in sciences, and I'm only speaking for my community here, certainly not generalizing, is to work across boundaries with social scientists and humanists and people who are working on the ground, anthropologists and others. And by bringing sort of them into the fold and taking your sort of work with them allows you to sort of really understand and appreciate challenges. So I think that case is made through strong partnership as opposed to one where you would discover something and then take them to the funding agencies. That is very different from the traditional entrepreneurial model that we are used to perhaps in our institutions, where you make a discovery and then you take it to the market. In this case, it's quite the opposite. It's actually the market, and I mean it in a very broad sense here, is telling you what the need might be.
Got it. Oh, that's very interesting. I never considered actually the poll. That's really important. Thank you for that insight.
Of course.
Let me turn things over to Professor Ishmael. Looks like your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yes, I had a follow-up question actually for Dr. Zaman. I loved your presentation. It was really informative and eye-opening. I had not realized, I guess, that developing countries were using antibiotics as treatment for several disorders, even those where antibiotics are not effective, to help because of the lack of effective treatments available in these countries, and that then leads to antibiotic resistance and then the lack of effectiveness of antibiotics when in fact they could be effective in individuals. And I'm just wondering if, and I'm sure that you already have looked into that, but has education towards that and doctors that are treating in these countries and maybe showing them data and facts that you have collected and from your lab, how has that been received? And has any of this been tried to be implemented in these countries?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Dr. Ismail. We have to recognize two things. There is the issue of excess antibiotics, and there's a huge issue of access. People die because they don't have frontline antibiotics, right? So the system that you may have in Ottawa or I have in Boston is not going to work of prescription-only systems because there are not enough people to prescribe. So while we would like to imagine a world where prescriptions work, well, there are not enough primary care doctors and nurses to prescribe in rural areas. So it is not going to work. So that's the first part of that. The second part of that equation is also important to recognize that you have to offer some kind of mechanism as an alternative. So people take antibiotics because they need medicines to get better. There is in our work in Yemen and even in Pakistan for that matter, the use of antibiotic susceptibility tests where you could tell that the fever here is because of a viral origin versus bacterial. That doesn't happen because it's out of pocket expense. So people buy it because they need it, right? So we have to sort of change that perception here. The doctors are also prescribing, some unethically, but some also because they want their patients to get better and there is no alternative. So it's a little more complicated in that regard. Awareness works if you offer alternatives. Awareness in the absence of real tangible sort of solutions wouldn't do anything. And there are studies in Jordan, in Lebanon and elsewhere where they say awareness alone doesn't do anything because people want to do something with that awareness. You say, well, antibiotics are bad, but then somebody says, well, then what should I do? Or how do I know that my fever is not because of a bacterial origin? And if you can't do that, saying antibiotics are bad, doesn't actually quite work. The other dimension, which I think is not appreciated enough in Pakistan or in many other parts, is the widespread use of antibiotics in the animal farming sector, right? So it is completely unregulated. It's a challenge in the US as well. But certainly in India, China, Pakistan, but also all over the Middle East, there is complete lack of regulation for animal use, for antibiotic use in animals. And that continues to make the problem worse because Pakistan, for example, has the second highest use of antibiotics in poultry after China. And it's completely unregulated. And the same goes on in other countries as well. So you really need a holistic response. You need to increase awareness. You need to offer mechanisms by which out-of-pocket expenses are few. You need to address the issue in animal sector. And then at the same time, make sure that people who really need antibiotics actually get them as well.
Thank you, Professor Zaman. Professor Ishmael, did I answer your question?
Yes, absolutely. I really see that the problem is quite large, several factors to take into account simultaneously. I mean, you're doing fantastic work, Dr. Zaman. Thank you so much for sensitizing us to these issues.
Agreed. Okay, one fast question in the Q&A. Dr. Amira Hassanin asks, can you detect unfolded antibodies of COVID in an animal model? And short answer is, I'm not sure. We're starting our animal models right now, but we'll get back to it. Okay, and I thought I saw another hand go up. Let me see. Yes, hand is up from Professor Fadwa. Go ahead, Professor Fadwa.
Actually, I would like to ask Professor Muhammad, there is some type of social connection, I'm talking about the Middle East, mainly Jordan, Lebanon, Syrian, and the refugees, and how they look for to supporting each other, because many of them, they take the antibiotic because without any doctor prescription, just by asking which one it's good and go to the pharmacy and buy it. So I think there is cultural aspects point of view, mainly between the refugee who control, they let to not pay too much money to get the medication. So they give the extra medicine for their families or relatives, and it's part of their cultural support or something like that. Also, there is no policies to determine who must prescribe the antibiotic and how the antibiotic should prescribe for each of the person. Because in Jordan here, you can go to the pharmacy and ask any type of antibiotic you want.
Mm.
There
It's
is
a
no
culture,
policy.
Fadwa. It's a culture,
Yeah,
Fadwa, in
it's
the
a
Middle
cultural.
East.
Yeah, it's a culture.
Yes.
I know.
No,
In
Yes,
the
so
Middle East, really.
yeah, unfortunately,
To get
yeah,
antibiotic for anything.
yes,
It is not just
yes.
the Middle East, it's everywhere. It's a significant issue, and the pharmacist has a tremendous role to play here, even more so than the doctor, because the pharmacist here is the gatekeeper, and your personal relations with the pharmacist, your knowledge of his or her background, your interactions play a tremendous role. We have a sort of this is a wonderful discussion. We have a couple of papers from Yemen coming out, but also from Jordan. I recently started working on this with a colleague in Egypt as well. But that's very similar to what you'd seen in India and Pakistan and many other parts of the world. But thank you for the point.
You know that, Dr. Muhammad, it's a culture. As example, my daughter is studying medicine, so that she's a doctor. But I forced her to get antibiotic when she get flu. Even she more and more explained to me that it's a virus, mom. It's a virus. But you know that it's a culture, because I want to avoid more side effects for her and so on. So that it's a culture to take antibiotic for any disease, for flu, even flu, simple flu.
Even another thing, they cannot take the simple antibiotic, okay? They look for the broad, strong one to take it to relieve the signs and symptoms directly. This is the make the antibiotic resistance is very high in the Middle East, like Jordan.
Okay, fascinating. I want to get a couple of questions for two more panelists that haven't had any questions. So I just want to make sure everyone gets involved in the discussion. Let's see. May I ask Professor Fadwa, I was fascinated by your real-time monitoring as someone who discovers new sensors. What sensors would you like? Like what would help you more effectively monitor your patients that you don't have currently?
Actually, different sensors we need. The more simple, not heavily one, okay, which use more for the vital organs like reflecting respiratory system, right? Like reflecting the cardiovascular system. This sensor is very important because it's reflect the data inside of the body. The most one we needed, I think, the sensor which determine the nervous system. Okay, we need something like that because everything is based control in the central nervous system. How it is work, how it's respected, and response to changes in all over the body. I think there's many sensors, they started to use it through the gut, small sensors, yeah, and go to the area they need to check it or something like that. But still, the artificial intelligence and nanotechnology and all of these, they are working in developing many sensors. We need it, yeah, still. Mostly, which we need it less expensive, not too much expensive sensors, because we need this to distribute it all over countries, regardless the level of income.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. That's going to be a challenge. I like that a lot. Thank you. Okay. Let me get a question for Professor Franco Kaburi Rizzo. And again, I apologize for mangling your name, but I absolutely loved your talk. I'm a big fan of antibody drug conjugates. And I wonder, have you thought about the area of theranostics, where you have both imaging and then also drug delivery at the same time? Or do you think that's just too complicated and too prone to sort of multivariable breakdown?
I mean, it's a good point. I think it's possible to do that, but we are a little bit far from that. But it's a good direction to move on. Yeah, it's great.
Oh, thank you. If I can ask one quick follow-up then, what do you see as the greatest challenges for getting your discoveries out into the world? What's next for you, and how are you tackling those big challenges?
Well, the idea is, or I think the big challenge is to develop a personal treatment. I mean, because now we are testing just this folate receptor mediator that is more general or common to all of that. But if instead of using folic acid, if we just do this with antibodies, we can just think in a specific a treatment, you know, for particular patients, for individual treatment. I think this is the way to move on, just to a specific treatment, not something general, in combination, of course, with other already ongoing treatments.
Well, good luck. I really like the approaches you're taking, and I hope it works. I'd love to see new treatments coming out. That would be really exciting.
He's a pure chemist, like us.
Yes, exactly. It's great. Love it.
That's why you like his work.
Well, I liked all the work, actually. This was a really terrific session. Professor Ishmael, should I turn things over to you to wrap it up?
Thank you so much.
Sorry, Nafisa. Before ending, could you please open your cameras, all of you?
Oh, yes.
The speakers, all of you. Dr. Shaheen, could you please take a photo for us?
Yes, sure.
Okay. Just smile. It's afternoon session for us.
It's end of the day.
End of the day, yes. Happy end.
Yeah, actually.
Dr. Muhammad Zaman, where is Dr. Zaman? Muhammad.
Can't see me?
No,
Really?
we can't see you.
Oh, I can see.
Yeah. Yeah. Now?
Really?
Can you take the photo with Muhammad?
Oh, can you see me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you see him, Shaheen?
Yes.
Okay. Take the photo with him also.
Yes. Thank you for your nice presentation. Although I'm not belong to the medical field of science, but I'm doing simulation of creating models how the diseases are spread, especially the infectious diseases. So it's kind of modeling the epidemics. In my MSc, I used to simulate the pertussis, or an airborne disease. And with my PhD, I simulated cholera, which is a waterborne disease. So it was interesting for me to listen to your presentations, although many of things were a bit difficult for me to understand. I mean, the medical issues. But thank you so much for being our dear and great guests at University of The Hague. Thank you.
By the way, she is Dr. Shaheen. She is the key behind this event with Dr. Ahmed Khalil. She is IT or artificial intelligence, Dr. Shaheen?
Well, I used to simulate the human behavior and the way they take the decision and the risk perception, the risk of epidemics, let's say. I used to implement the artificial intelligence algorithm in my models. So yes, kind of, yes, the specialist kind of say, yeah.
She is from Kurdistan. You are from Kurdistan?
Yes, from Iraq,
okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, wrap up, Dr. Nafisa, and I will thank you all after end.
Okay, perfect. So thank you all to our speakers today for taking the time to share your work. This was really, really fantastic. I want to thank my co-moderator today, Dr. Weiss, for moderating with me this session. We would also together like to thank all the organizers of the World for Women in Science for putting this event and for inviting us to participate and share our work. That next time we will have the opportunity to be there with you in person.
Hopefully.
I'd like to thank the University of Doha and Women in Science Without Border initiative for putting this event together. It's been truly a pleasure to participate. Thank you to all the participants for attending the session today. If there is any pending questions for our panelists, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. It will be a pleasure to chat with you one-on-one or answer your questions by email. Thank you, Dr. Amal Amin, for considering us and for including us in this event. It's been quite an honor to participate. And so good evening to everyone or good afternoon to everyone, depending on the time zone that you are in. And I turn it over to you, Dr. Amin.
I would like also to thank you all, Dr. Zaman, Dr. Franco, you, Nafisa, Dr. Greg, Dr. Fadwa. I would like to thank you all for accepting my invitation. It was a happy end for the day. Please stay with us tomorrow. If you have time, you can attend any session. Your lectures on the Facebook, you can return back to the Facebook now and listen to yourself again or share the links. Okay. Wish you all good day if you are in the beginning of the day, like Greg and Franco, I think. And good night for us in Iraq and Egypt. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. See you again.